first explosion didn't just shake the ground, it shook the global economy. At exactly 2:17 a.m., flames erupted near one of the most critical energy hubs on Earth, the Fujairah Port, not inside the Persian Gulf, but just outside it, a location once considered safe, and that's what made this moment terrifying. Because if Fujairah isn't safe, nowhere in the global oil network is. What followed wasn't just a single strike. It was part of a rapidly escalating storm, waves of drones, missiles, and coordinated attacks stretching across the Gulf. In just over 2 weeks of conflict, more than 2,000 aerial attacks have been reported across the region, and the United Arab Emirates, one of the world's most stable energy exporters, suddenly found itself on the front line. But here's the real question. Why target Fujairah? This isn't just any port. Fujairah is one of the few oil export routes that bypass the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point through which nearly 20% of the world's oil flows. And right now, that choke point is collapsing. Iran, responding to US and Israeli strikes, has effectively turned the strait into a pressure valve, controlling who gets through and who doesn't. So when drones hit Fujairah, this wasn't random, this was strategy, a message, a warning, and possibly the beginning of a new phase of warfare, one where energy infrastructure becomes the primary battlefield. But the most shocking part? Despite multiple strikes, fires, and shutdowns, Fujairah isn't completely destroyed. Not yet. Operations have been disrupted, tankers delayed, oil loading halted, but the system is still standing, barely, which raises a far more dangerous possibility. What happens if the next wave is bigger? Because according to military analysts, this may not be the peak of escalation, this may only be the beginning. The first wave was never meant to finish the job. It was meant to test the system. Air defenses, response time, radar coverage, every drone intercepted, every missile tracked, every delay recorded. Because modern warfare isn't just about destruction, it's about data collection under fire. And according to multiple defense analysts, the pattern emerging in the Gulf is deeply calculated, almost surgical. First came low-cost drones, slow, small, and difficult to detect. Then cruise missiles, faster, more precise. And finally, coordinated saturation attacks, designed to overwhelm even advanced air defense systems. This is what military strategists call an escalation ladder. And right now, the Gulf is climbing it, fast. Here's where things get serious. The UAE operates some of the most advanced air defense systems in the region, including Patriot missile batteries and THAAD systems, but even the best systems have a limit. They are designed to intercept high-value threats, not endless waves of low-cost drones. So when dozens or even hundreds of aerial targets are launched in staggered waves, the system begins to crack, not because it fails, but because it gets overwhelmed. And this is exactly where Iran's strategy becomes clear. Instead of relying solely on expensive ballistic missiles, they're using a hybrid warfare approach: cheap drones to exhaust defenses, precision missiles to strike key targets, timing gaps to exploit system fatigue. It's not about one big attack, it's about breaking the shield first, then striking the heart. Now connect this back to Fujairah. The port isn't just an oil hub, it's part of a strategic bypass pipeline system that allows the UAE to export crude without passing through the Strait of Hormuz. In simple terms, if Hormuz is blocked, Fujairah keeps oil flowing. So by targeting Fujairah, Iran isn't just attacking infrastructure, it's targeting a backup system designed to survive war. And here's the chilling part. Each wave of attacks appears slightly more coordinated than the last. Faster response cycles, better timing, more pressure on defenses, which suggests something critical. This isn't random escalation. This is learning in real time. And if that's true, then the next phase won't just test defenses. It may aim to collapse them completely. War is chaos on the surface. But underneath, it's numbers. And right now, the numbers coming out of the Gulf are sending shockwaves through the global system. Let's start with the most critical one. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That's roughly 17 to 20 million barrels per day. Now imagine even a fraction of that being disrupted, because it already is. Since the escalation began, over 2,000 aerial strikes have been reported across the region. Multiple energy facilities have faced temporary shutdowns. Tanker insurance costs have surged by 30 and more than 50%. Shipping companies are rerouting vessels, adding days, sometimes weeks, to delivery times. This isn't just conflict, this is systemic pressure on global supply chains. Now let's zoom in on Fujairah. The Fujairah port handles millions of barrels of oil and refined products daily. It's also one of the world's largest bunkering hubs, fueling ships that keep global trade moving. So when drone strikes disrupt operations there, it doesn't just affect the UAE. It affects everything that moves across oceans, and the markets are already reacting. Within days of intensified strikes, oil prices spiked sharply, with Brent crude jumping above $100 per barrel. Energy analysts warned of a potential surge toward $120 to $150 if disruptions continue. Stock markets in multiple regions showed volatility tied directly to Gulf tensions. Because energy isn't just another commodity, it's the foundation of modern economies. But here's where the numbers turn into something more dangerous: time. Global oil reserves can buffer short-term shocks, but prolonged disruption? That's where the real damage begins. Strategic reserves can cover weeks, maybe months. But supply chains take much longer to stabilize. And once panic buying begins, prices don't rise gradually. They spike violently. And this is exactly the scenario analysts fear: a slow squeeze turning into a sudden snap. Because if Fujairah goes offline completely and Hormuz becomes too risky to navigate, then we're not talking about a regional crisis anymore. We're talking about a global energy shock, one that could ripple through fuel prices, food supply chains, manufacturing costs, and entire national economies. And the most unsettling number of all, zero margin for error. Because in a system this tight, it doesn't take total collapse, just enough disruption to tip the balance. At this stage, the explosions are only half the story. The real battle is happening in war rooms, intelligence briefings, and think tanks across the world. Because what's unfolding in the Gulf is starting to look less like a regional conflict, and more like a blueprint for modern warfare. According to analysts from organizations like the RAND Corporation and the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Iran's approach reflects a doctrine known as distributed attrition warfare. Instead of one overwhelming strike, you apply constant multi-layered pressure across energy infrastructure, air defense systems, maritime routes, economic stability, not to win instantly, but to erode the system until it fails. Now, look at the pattern again. Repeated drone waves, increasing coordination, strategic targeting of energy, bypass routes, psychological pressure on global markets. This isn't escalation for the sake of chaos. It's escalation with a long-term objective. And that objective may not be what most people think, because this might not be about destroying the UAE. It may be about reshaping global behavior, forcing higher oil prices, political pressure on Western allies, reduced military freedom in the region. In other words, turning energy into a strategic weapon. But here's where the situation becomes even more dangerous. Military analysts warn that conflicts like this often follow a predictable curve. Testing phase, probing defenses, we've seen this. Saturation phase, overwhelming systems, currently unfolding. Decisive strike phase, targeting critical nodes for maximum disruption. And if that model holds true, the next phase won't be about frequency. It will be about precision. Potential targets could include major desalination plants, water supply, power grids, key pipeline junctions, strategic command centers. Because modern warfare isn't just about military bases anymore, it's about civilian infrastructure that keeps nations functioning. And there's another layer most people are missing: alliances. The UAE is not isolated. Any large-scale escalation risks pulling in the United States' regional Gulf partners, possibly even wider international involvement, which means a localized conflict could rapidly transform into a multi-theater confrontation. So the question is no longer, will there be more strikes? That seems inevitable. The real question is, where will the next strike land, and what system will it push to the breaking point? Because if the next phase targets the right node, this won't just disrupt the system, it could shut it down entirely. Systems don't collapse all at once. They fail piece by piece, quietly at first, then suddenly. Right now, the Gulf isn't in total blackout. Oil is still flowing. Ships are still moving. Markets are still functioning. But underneath that surface, the stress fractures are spreading. Let's connect the chain reaction. Repeated strikes increase insurance costs. Higher risk forces ships to delay or reroute. Delays reduce daily supply throughput. Lower supply drives price spikes. Price spikes trigger panic responses from markets and governments. And just like that, a military conflict becomes a global economic trigger. Now add time pressure, because the longer this continues, the less room there is to stabilize. Strategic reserves can soften the blow, but they're not infinite. Governments can intervene, but not instantly. And supply chains? They don't bend easily. They snap under sustained pressure. Here's the worst-case scenario analysts fear: a synchronized disruption. Not one target, not one strike, but multiple critical systems hit within a narrow window. A major facility at Fujairah Port goes fully offline. Increased threats make the Strait of Hormuz too dangerous for tankers. Regional energy production slows due to infrastructure risk. At that point, it's no longer a disruption, it's a bottleneck collapse. And when that happens, the effects don't stay in the Gulf. They spread globally, fast. Fuel shortages begin in import-dependent countries. Transportation costs surge. Food prices rise due to logistics pressure. Manufacturing slows as energy costs spike. This is how a regional conflict turns into a worldwide economic shockwave. But here's the most dangerous variable of all: uncertainty. Markets can handle bad news. What they can't handle is unpredictability. And right now, no one knows when the next strike will come, how large it will be, or which system it will target, which means every hour that passes adds pressure to an already strained system. This isn't just about damage anymore, it's about timing the breaking point. Because if escalation continues, we're not looking at a slow decline. We're looking at a moment where everything hits at once. And when that moment comes, there may be no time left to react. This was never just about one strike, not one port, not one country, not even one conflict. What's unfolding in the Gulf is something far bigger, a stress test of the entire global system, because everything we've talked about, the drone waves, the pressure on defenses, the targeting of energy infrastructure, all of it points to one unavoidable reality. The world is more fragile than it looks. For decades, global stability has depended on a few critical lifelines. Energy flowing smoothly through choke points like the Strait of Hormuz backup routes, like Fujairah Port functioning without disruption, predictable trade routes, keeping economies synchronized. But now, those assumptions are being challenged in real time. And here's the deeper shift most people are missing. This isn't just a military confrontation anymore. It's infrastructure warfare, a new kind of conflict where you don't need to invade a country. You just need to interrupt the systems it depends on. Think about it. You don't have to destroy every refinery, just enough to disrupt supply. You don't have to block every ship, just enough to create fear. You don't have to win on the battlefield. You just have to make the system unreliable. And once reliability is gone, everything starts to unravel. Markets lose confidence, governments scramble, alliances get tested, and suddenly, decisions aren't made strategically. They're made urgently. That's when mistakes happen. And in conflicts like this, mistakes are what turn regional crises into global disasters. Now zoom out. If escalation continues, the consequences won't stop at oil prices. We could be looking at long-term shifts in global energy routes, increased militarization of trade corridors, new alliances forming under pressure, and a world that becomes less stable, more reactive, and far more unpredictable. But here's the most important takeaway. This moment hasn't peaked yet. Everything we've seen so far, the strikes, the disruptions, the warnings, may only be the setup phase. Because if the escalation ladder continues, and the next phase targets critical systems with precision, we're no longer talking about pressure, we're talking about collapse points. And when those collapse points are hit, there won't be time for long explanations, only reactions. So the question is, are we witnessing a contained conflict, or the early stages of a global turning point? Because the next strike, the next disruption, the next decision could change everything. If you want to stay ahead of global power shifts, hidden strategies, and the real forces shaping the world, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't miss what comes next. Because in times like these, the difference between being informed and being surprised is everything.